Over the past few months, a chilling wave of disappearances and deaths has swept across New England, with a string of women vanishing or being found dead under mysterious and unsettling circumstances. From lifeless bodies being pulled from rivers to remains being discovered deep in the woods, each case adds to a growing list of unanswered questions, with many concerned that there may be a serial killer operating out of New England. However, despite the mounting evidence of a possible predator, many officials remain tight-lipped, dismissing the connections as mere coincidences or unrelated tragedies, which, if anything, has only raised the profile of this theory. But after spending time exploring public forums and local discussions, you'll quickly see that this rising pattern is terrifyingly real, and the communities affected are desperate for answers. Now, if you're familiar with my channel, then you'll likely know that I usually prefer to focus on just one case at a time to ensure each victim gets the attention they deserve. But given the chilling connections that have recently been uncovered, I feel it is necessary to discuss these cases as a whole. So with this in mind, please brace yourself as we delve into the unsettling possibility of a New England serial killer, starting with the mysterious death of Paige Fannon. On Wednesday, the 6th of March, just earlier this year, a 35-year-old woman named Paige Fannon was reported missing after she failed to return home to New York the night before. According to her loved ones, she'd been acting strange in the days leading up to her disappearance, but no one expected what would come next. Less than 24 hours later, her body would be found floating in the Norwalk River across the state line in Connecticut, with her personal belongings scattered eerily across the riverbank. Despite the disturbing scene, however, police claimed there were no immediate signs of foul play, but something about the timing didn't sit right with those following the case. Investigators began looking into her movements, but quickly ran into a wall, as there was no CCTV footage or witnesses. So as time went on, theories began to swirl, some claiming it was a tragic accident, while others believed something darker was at play. But with no arrests, no suspects, and no further updates from law enforcement, Paige's story eventually faded from the headlines. But to this day, questions still linger over whether her death was just a strange coincidence or something far more deliberate, as the situation would suddenly take a dramatic turn when it was eventually uncovered that later that very same day, a lone hunter walking through a wooded patch near Route 3 in Plymouth, Massachusetts, would stumble across something deeply unsettling: a human skull, half buried beneath leaves and brush. The remains were partial, with no clothing or ID present, just a fragmented piece of someone's life, left to weather in silence. Authorities were called to the scene, and an extensive search of the area began, but little else was found. So, with no clear cause of death, investigators were left chasing shadows, and as the days passed without any new leads, this unidentified skull would quietly become one of New England's most haunting mysteries. But little did anybody know at the time that these cases would only be the tip of the iceberg, as just a few weeks later, another discovery would be made, opening up the possibility that there could be a serial killer operating in and around the vast region of New England. On Thursday the 20th of March, nearly 6 months after she was last seen, the remains of a 59-year-old woman named Denise Leary were found in a wooded patch behind a home in New Haven, Connecticut. Her body was so severely decomposed that it took investigators time just to confirm her identity, but once they did, it was quickly learned that she had vanished the previous September, with few clues left behind. Denise had long struggled with paranoid schizophrenia, and some believed that she may have simply wandered off and succumbed to the elements, but others weren't so sure. The length of time it took to find her and the isolated spot where she was discovered sparked uneasy questions. Was it just a tragic end to a vulnerable life, or had someone exploited her illness to do something darker? Police didn't say much. There were no signs of foul play, but no real answers either, and with no surveillance and a very rough timeline, Denise's family were left trapped in the most painful kind of uncertainty. But just like in the case of Paige Fannon, another set of remains would be found that same day, when a suitcase was discovered near a cemetery in Groton, Connecticut, and inside were the remains of a woman believed to be aged between 40 to 60 years old. The sight alone was enough to alarm even seasoned investigators, but once again, there was no identification and no personal belongings, just a brutal scene and unanswered questions. Authorities said there was no evidence connecting this case to the others, but they couldn't rule anything out. So as days passed and no one came forward, the woman's identity remained a silent void in a growing list of tragedies. However, once again, this already harrowing situation was still only in its infancy, as another discovery would be made later that very same month that would quickly make it into the headlines. On Wednesday the 26th of March, the long and painful search for a 56-year-old woman named Michele Romano came to a sudden and tragic end, when her remains were discovered in the dense woods of Foster, Rhode Island, 8 months after she had first vanished without a trace. Michele had gone missing sometime in late July of the previous year, with her family reporting her disappearance almost immediately, sharing flyers and Facebook posts. But as the days stretched into weeks, answers continued to remain elusive. However, this silence would eventually come to a tragic end when a local resident stumbled upon Michele's lifeless body, hidden deep in the trees, far from any trail or public access point. Police were quick to label the circumstances as suspicious, but no suspects were named, and no cause of death was ever released. To those who knew her, the idea that she had somehow wandered into that remote stretch of forest alone made little sense. There were no clear signs of how she got there, no vehicle found nearby, and no reason for her to have been in that area. But despite the recovery of her remains, it seemed that this discovery had provided more questions than answers. Why was she left there? Who might have been involved? And why, after all this time, did it feel like her story was being quietly pushed aside? So as online communities began linking Michele's name to other recent discoveries across New England, some began to suspect a pattern. But without any evidence, and with police keeping their investigation close to the chest, her case, like so many others, remained suspended in mystery. And for Michele's loved ones, the discovery brought only partial closure, because while they finally knew where she was, there were whispers that her death could have been part of a long list of suspicious crimes, many of which were occurring just a few miles away from each other within the very same month. But this suspicion would only grow when the next body would be found in the following month. On Wednesday the 9th of April, another disturbing report came out of New England, this time from the quiet town of Killingly, Connecticut. Human remains had once again been discovered, but this time there was no identification available, just a skeletal presence found in the woods, bringing the total number of bodies found in the region to 6 in just 5 weeks. Police released only the bare minimum, that a body had been found, that an investigation was underway, and that no further information could be shared. But the silence said more than words. No photos, no updates, no appeals to the public. It was as if whoever this person was, they had simply been erased. So understandably, once the media got a hold of this discovery, speculation immediately began to erupt online. Many were now questioning whether this could be another piece of the puzzle, or if there was perhaps something tying these deaths together that officials weren't ready to admit. The lack of detail only fed the unease, and for many, this case wasn't just another tragedy. It was a sign that something was happening beneath the surface, something the authorities just didn't want to talk about. But as you can probably guess, the situation was still far from over, as 4 more bodies would be found in April alone, 3 of which remain unidentified to this day. On Sunday the 20th of April, less than 2 weeks later, yet another body would surface, this time from the Seekonk River in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Once again, there were no witnesses and no identifying details ever released, just a short and motionless report confirming the discovery of human remains that were pulled from the river. And while authorities urged the public to remain calm, insisting there was no connection to any other recent deaths, it was becoming harder and harder for people to believe that. Then, just 2 days later, on Tuesday the 22nd of April, the body of a 45-year-old woman named Meggan Meredith would be discovered in Springfield, Massachusetts, near a bike path not too far from where she was last seen. Meggan had only recently been reported missing, so it came as quite a shock when her body was found in a wooded patch of the trail. Police quickly labelled the death as suspicious, but provided no explanation or potential theories, leading Meggan to become another name added to the growing list. But to make matters even worse, then came Sunday the 27th of April, where a body was pulled from the Connecticut River near Rocky Hill. Like the others, no name, no age, and no information was released, resulting in this case being branded as just another anonymous death dropped into public consciousness without any closure. And before anybody could catch their breath, just hours later that same day, another body would turn up, this time in Taunton, Massachusetts. Once again, police offered no name and no background, only a brief acknowledgement that a death had occurred and that it was under investigation. But the dark reality of the situation was becoming increasingly more harrowing, as 4 bodies had now been discovered in just 1 week, making it 9 deaths in total since early March. And with every passing day, people started talking more openly about the possibility that these cases weren't isolated at all. But unfortunately, just when the media began to think that the body count had finally come to an end, the serial killer theory would be reinvigorated when 2 more victims would be discovered. On Friday the 30th of May, a 34-year-old woman named Jasmine Wilkes was reported missing after being seen in New Haven, Connecticut. Days later, her body would be discovered in the secluded woods of Edgewood Park, just a short distance from where she was last seen alive. At first, police were tight-lipped, offering only a small confirmation that a body matching Jasmine's description had been found. There was no mention of a suspect and no indication of how she had died, just another name added to a mounting list. However, what made Jasmine's case especially chilling was its proximity to a park that locals frequented, a place that was meant for leisure. It was the kind of location where someone shouldn't just vanish, as there would surely be witnesses. The words "under investigation" echoed in the press release, but that was all. No theory, no timeline, and no comfort for a community that was once again left in the dark. As her name joined those of other women found in wooded or isolated spots across New England, the public began to speculate if these were more than just tragic coincidences, as they had done before. But for Jasmine's family and her neighbours, the unanswered questions were painfully clear. How had she ended up there, and will anyone ever come forward to explain? However, the situation would continue to escalate further, when 2 more bodies would also be found across New England, bringing the total count to 12, and leaving an enormous number of local residents petrified that they could be next. And just 2 days after Jasmine's body was found, this fear would once again become a heartbreaking reality for what would be the youngest victim on this troubling list. On Saturday the 1st of June, the body of a 21-year-old woman named Adriana Suazo was found deep in the woods of Milton, Massachusetts, just days after her sudden disappearance had sparked a panic. The media took notice, and her photo was spread across social media in the hopes that it would garner more attention for this growing epidemic. She had vanished without warning, but when her body was discovered just a few miles away from one of the other victims, even those who previously sat on the fence regarding the serial killer theory began to feel that this was no longer just a tragic streak of unrelated deaths. The police quickly ruled her death as suspicious, but stopped short of providing any further detail, and once again the public were left to fill in the blanks. Some pointed out how familiar it all felt. A young woman goes missing only to be found in a secluded area with little to no explanation, and with Adriana, the familiar pattern hit a new level of urgency. Rumours swirled, people questioned whether a serial predator was moving quietly throughout the region, targeting women in isolated places, and although law enforcement attempted to offer reassurance, the public just wasn't buying it. And as Adriana's case joined a growing web of unexplained deaths, the message was clear: whatever was happening probably wasn't over. However, as far as I can tell from my research, this tragic string of deaths seems to have finally come to an end, at least for now. So all we can do is help spread this story in the hopes that the police will begin to take this theory more seriously, allowing the families of these victims to get the justice they deserve. Anyway, with that, I think I'll leave this video here, but please let me know your thoughts in the comments and if there are any other New England cases which you think may be connected. But until next time, thank you so much for watching, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for updates to these stories. Also, if you found the video interesting, feel free to check out the playlist on screen now, which features the strange deaths and disappearances of many other people across America.